Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. The semester is winding down. Spring football is over. The spring portal window is coming to an end here as activity really starts to slow down as players find their destination in the game of musical chairs. It's time to take a look at where the Purdue football program is following spring ahead of Barry Odom's debut season. Is there reason to believe? Can Purdue bounce back after a really rough couple of years? We'll discuss here today. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Lots to talk about here all summer. It's going to be a busy summer. Lots of news. You know, you've seen scheduling stuff come out for Purdue basketball, new numbers coming out for Purdue basketball, lots of portal action for football. Come follow along on Twitter, join the conversation. You can always send over questions for the show there. DM me @BoilersBeyond, or you can email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Let me know what you want to talk about this summer, because we do have a few months here before we get into the countdown to kickoff and really start previewing football season. Send me over what you want me to talk about, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, because we will be here all summer long talking about Purdue sports. But today, I wanted to take a look at Purdue football here post-spring, because it is a very interesting time for the Purdue football program. I'm around Purdue fans on a near daily basis, and the general consensus among most fans that I've talked to is that they've never been less interested in Purdue football. And while I think that's probably true, that can also change really quickly. As we saw in 2017, when fans get a little bit of reason to believe, they're going to believe. They're going to buy in. And I think for Purdue, they just need that reason to believe after what was frankly a disastrous 2-year tenure for Ryan Walters. We've talked about it ad nauseum. We talked about what went wrong. But in terms of a enthusiasm metric, that could not have gone worse. And Purdue's in a bit of a bummer of a spot here as it transitions into a new era where it needs to be successful. This is going to be a full-on rebuild, which can mean a few different things. Again, I look back to 2017 as the model year one. That, along with, Joe Tiller back in 1997, a couple of the best year ones in Purdue history, where Purdue had very little reason to believe entering those two seasons, yet it went to bowl games. In 97, it made the top 25. In 2017, a little more recent time, it made a bowl game when absolutely no one saw that coming against a pretty difficult schedule. And while I don't know if that will happen this year, I do feel that would be quite the long shot. Purdue can build up some momentum, and Purdue can bring some enthusiasm back, because Purdue's in a tough spot here. Rebuilds look different now than they did 5-10 years ago. And I don't know that the term rebuild even means what it used to, because with the transfer portal, this changes things. Purdue has up, I think it's 50 new players, 50 transfers into the program for this year. I mean, that's a ton of turnover. This is a brand new roster. You factor in the dozen or so high school recruits, there aren't many players who were at Purdue a season ago. But that's a good thing. There was nothing about last season that made you think that those guys needed to stick around. That team often quit. That team did not have a whole lot of resolve to it. The Illinois game was about the one time that team fought back. You look at just performances like losing 66-0 at Indiana, 66-7 Notre Dame, 52-6 to a Wisconsin team that missed a bowl game. Look, there were so many issues with last season's squad that cutting bait and just starting over fresh is going to be the most optimal way for Barry Odom to try to turn this thing around. And the transfer portal has been overall a very net negative for Purdue since it came into existence. You've had some good players come in. Charlie Jones being the biggest one. But you've had some decent impacts from some transfers. Tyrone Tracy came in and became an NFL guy. But for the most part, you look at the guys Purdue has lost. Losing Nick Scorton, losing Deion Burks. Now the 4 guys from last year, and Thieneman, Claire, Brevard, and Helt going to college football playoff schools from a season ago. That's tough. That's a tough blow. But now I do think the pendulum might be swinging in the other direction here, because by all accounts, Purdue has had a pretty solid spring portal cycle here. And we'll kind of go into more detail what Purdue has done, but this roster looks nothing like it did a season ago. It's almost unbelievable to look back at last season. When you fire your offensive coordinator in September, you have serious problems. When Brett Ciancia over at Pick Six Previews, good friend of ours who's been on the show before, tweeted out that Purdue played 5 college football playoff teams last year and lost by a combined total of 261-17. Just an utter disaster. There's no other way to put it. There was no competitiveness. And that's an indicator that from a talent perspective, you're not where you need to be. I will be the first to tell you that Purdue had more talent than the record indicated last season. There were too many decent players on that roster to be 1-11 and go down as one of the most historically feudal power conference teams in recent memory. But, those guys who you lost, they don't replace themselves. Those 4 are big losses. I'll always believe that Hudson Card was better than what he showed at Purdue. It's a moot point now. We'll never know. But Purdue has questions at quarterback now, and Purdue has gone to the portal. It's really tried to fill some gaps. And by far the most interesting part of Purdue's spring portal is the return of Ryan Brown. This is certainly the transfer that's going to get the most buzz. This is the most interesting one. Ryan Brown kind of became a folk hero last year after that comeback at Illinois. There's been a lot of excitement around him coming back. He transferred to North Carolina after Ryan Walters was fired. Timing-wise, I think Barry Odom had been hired before he committed, but he wasn't planning to come back. And he goes to Carolina, plays spring practice, hops in the portal, and now he's back at Purdue. I don't know exactly what to make of this. Purdue went out and got a number of quarterbacks in the portal back in the winter. Malachi Singleton came in from Arkansas, is probably the guy who you would have anticipated would be the starter. Evans Chuba came in from Washington State. E.J. Colson came in from Central Florida. He's already hit the portal. Bennett Meredith is still around, who played against Northwestern a couple years back. There is not an obvious, this is the guy in this quarterback room. And while Ryan Brown has some really intriguing elements to his game, he still has to prove that. Because I don't know that a second half against Illinois proves that he is the guy. That second half at Illinois, to me, was just the most bizarre game I've ever seen. Purdue was absolutely dead in the water, and then Purdue came back out of nowhere. The dynamics in that game were unlike you'll ever see. Ryan Walters was so familiar with what Aaron Henry was looking to do as Illinois' defensive coordinator, really knows how to beat that defense, also because he saw it happen to his defense every week. That was interesting. There was a lot to that. And against Oregon, Ryan Brown didn't stand a chance. Purdue was so overwhelmed against one of the best teams in the country. He can run. He can really run. And that's something you're getting from him. By all accounts, Purdue wants to run the football a lot. And that's going to come in the quarterback run game. That's going to come in the traditional run game. Barry Odom has a very flexible offense. And I think that's a really positive thing. You're not trying to fit square peg into round hole the way we've seen happen at Purdue with players at times, certainly with Purdue's defense in the past, but you've seen it on offense too with, Daryl Hazel having no identity. This is something where I think Ryan Brown can be an all right fit for what Purdue wants to do, even though we don't have a super defined idea of what Purdue wants to do. The quarterback play this spring left a lot to be desired based off every report out there. If you follow Tom Dienhart, if you followed Nathan Baird or Sam King, the guys who were there on the ground, they made it very clear that Purdue's quarterback play really struggled. And those practices were open to the media. It was pretty much a consensus. Purdue has to have a decent quarterback. You can't have a good team at Purdue at the level Purdue is at with an overall roster without respectable quarterback play. That's going to be really big. I do think it's intriguing that Purdue has totally flipped the offensive line, a position group that has just been such a problem for Purdue for so long now. There's a lot to attribute that to. It's a hard position to build up. It really is. It's not an easy position to have a ton of success at when you're not recruiting at a super elite level. I think that is the number one position where what you see with guys out of high school is usually what you get. You get some guys who bloom up, but you either are that big or you're not. And Purdue has really struggled to have consistency on the offensive line. If you're going to try to run the ball and you're going to try to really establish that, you have to have some type of offensive line. You can't just run and have no one blocking for you. So I think Purdue's brought 6 or 7 offensive linemen in the spring portal alone. Overall, it's a brand new offensive line. I was looking the other day. There are maybe 1 or 2 guys who have been around. Joey Tanona's been around and he's back. And then Bakine Coley's been around and he's back. But there aren't many here. There aren't many here at all. It's a really interesting group. And, frankly, I think there's something to be excited about there because it's unknown and you really have to find something to have that work. Purdue has taken some high ceiling guys out of the portal. I look at the couple of Georgia guys, Nitro Tuggle, Marquise Easley, Michael Jackson as well. Not the music artist from Gary, Indiana, a different Michael Jackson. I know there's this hesitancy from Purdue fans about these Georgia transfers because of how it went last year with Nyland Green, with CJ Smith, really those two. Morissette didn't do a whole lot. He's still around. CJ Madden got hurt. He's still around. But Nyland Green and CJ Smith were massive disappointments. There's no other way around it. Look, this is an interesting situation here because these guys are both young. They were freshmen last year, and now they hit the portal. They did both have off-the-field speeding arrests at Georgia, or reckless driving arrests. I don't know which one it was. We'll see if that follows. Obviously you don't want to get into that situation at Purdue, but Purdue is in a position where it needs to take chances on guys if it feels that the issues are fairly benign. You have to have talent on this roster. Tuggle is a really exciting prospect. He represents the Northern Lakes Conference back up to my homeland. I can't say that I expected to see Northwood High School represented on Purdue's football team, but here we are. Tuggle's a really good athlete. He can really do some stuff, can play outside, can play the slot. Marquise Easley is kind of the same deal. Big offensive lineman from the Chicago area. Purdue needs guys like this. Purdue needs guys that can be difference makers, be better than what you normally get. And these are guys who were really highly touted out of high school. These are guys who, haven't shown that they can't live up to it. Nitro Tuggle got on the field a little bit last year, and it's Purdue took several young-ish guys in the portal. It's a mix. Purdue took some veteran guys who are coming up a level for that last year of eligibility. Purdue took some younger guys who have multiple years. Purdue's at 50 transfers right now. So, I don't know what to make of all these guys. I'm not going to sit here and read off name after name after name because that's boring as can be to listen to. But I know this. Having the transfer portal as a thing in the sport right now is a really good thing for Purdue football. It really is. If this was 2005 and there was no transfer portal, you'd be looking at a 3 to 4 year outlook before Purdue could hope to compete. Because what had gone on the last couple of years was simply so bad that there wasn't a path forward. This needed to be torn down to the studs. It's funny. We've spent so long talking about basketball here that it almost makes you forget simply how bad it was last year. But you go back and look, and the way Purdue performed was just so poor. It was worse than just being a bad team. I mean, some of the performances were just abominations. And ultimately, it was a really, really big mistake by Purdue's athletic department that it hopes has now been rectified. Barry Odom has certainly brought in a new culture. It's night and day. Barry Odom versus the previous staff. What they want the culture to be, the way they approach things, it's very different. And for Purdue, I think that's a very, very positive thing. I wouldn't say that expectations should be high for Purdue this year, just to be perfectly blunt with you. It has a long way to go still. You have some really difficult schedules here. You look at this year, I mean, you play Notre Dame again. And we've talked about it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. But when you play Notre Dame, and there are perfectly valid reasons to do so, but when you play Notre Dame, you are pretty much taking a loss before the season starts. Just historically, that's the way it's worked for Purdue since the 60s or so. You get Ohio State and Michigan. Not ideal. You go to Michigan, you get Ohio State at home. Washington is a really tough scheduling dynamic on the road at the end of 7 straight games. Southern Cal comes in. That's going to be a challenge. This is not an easy schedule. You're starting new. You're starting over fresh. You are, you're really putting yourself in a difficult spot this year, but you have to start somewhere. It's going to be interesting because as you looked at what Ryan Walters wanted to do, at least on defense, you knew exactly what he wanted to do and how he would piece guys together. Here, we really have no idea what Barry Odom's going to look to do. So I'm fascinated to see how things come together. I think Barry Odom's flexibility here is going to be a really big deal because there are limitations to this team. There are probably always going to be limitations, right? I don't know that Purdue is ever going to be a top 5 talent roster in the Big Ten. That's a big ask when you have Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and Oregon and Southern Cal in your conference. But if you're able to adapt and you're able to be flexible and you're able to put something out there that optimizes your roster, maybe you can do something here. Kind of a closing thought. I'm very curious long term to see what revenue sharing does to football, because I wonder about this in the spring portal here. We're close enough to what should be a house settlement coming soon that I would assume revenue sharing is a big part of these conversations. And that gives Purdue a lot of money to work with that it didn't have before. Of course, it's important to point out everyone has that. It's not just Purdue. Everyone in the Big Ten is going to have roughly the same amount of money in revenue sharing. But it helps bridge the gap a little bit. I'm very skeptical that this clearinghouse for NIL deals will be anything worthwhile. But Any limitation there should help Purdue, and anything with revenue sharing should help because it gives Purdue money to work with. It gives Purdue a fighting chance, and that's what Purdue needs here. For as much as we talked about last week, how this era has allowed Purdue basketball to really thrive, it's done the opposite for Purdue football, coupled with a really poor hire at a really important time when it came to all of that stuff. So I'm curious to see here if this allows Purdue to recruit at a little bit higher of a level, to get a little bit more talent, especially out of the transfer portal, when maybe you have more money to work with than the Big 12 and the ACC. Something to note here. I know right now the vibes around Purdue's fan base when it comes to football are pretty low. Make no mistake about it, though. This is the most important sport for Purdue. Yes, Purdue's a basketball school. Purdue's fan base is very basketball skewed, but football is what makes everything work. You look at that TV contract that is paying the athletic department millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. That is almost entirely because of football. Basketball does not have the value that football does. Football keeps the college sports universe flowing. And with this conference, look, the TV networks that really run the show now need teams to be competitive. They need teams to play against Penn State and Ohio State and at least be competitive. Purdue was very far from that last year. And I think any steps Purdue can take this year should be viewed as a really big positive. I would not expect 7-8 wins. I don't know what win total I would expect. You get Ball State and Southern Illinois, and then after that, I have no idea. But I think Purdue just needs to have a season, and we'll talk a lot more, where you show some proof of concept and you allow fans to believe. Because ultimately, this is really important to Purdue that it works out, and we have no idea what to expect. But I do think here in the last month or so, Purdue has gotten better. Purdue has improved its roster. We didn't get to see a spring game. By all accounts, still a ways to go there. And even once we get playing, Purdue's still probably going to have a ways to go. We'll see what it can do here overall. But that's kind of all I've got for today. I know it was a bit of a shorter episode. Thanks for listening. As I said, we're going to have some stuff going on this summer. Probably get a few guests on maybe. Send me over topics. Send me over things you want me to discuss, though. All things Purdue, let me know. Email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Tweet me @BoilersBeyond. Send me a DM there. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.